So working in the shop with a bunch of different people, you're moving fast and so forth, mistakes happen. One day, it was one of our very busy days. I was in management, but my guys always liked, I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. A lot of managers, they're pencil pusher kind of guys. They don't actually work on cars. But I did, so I'd go help. So one day we're backed up. We get this truck in. It's another F-250, 350, one or the other with the diesel 7.3, the old school, I call it the school bus motor. I put it up on the lift, grab the oil drain, start draining the oil, and these hold 3 gallons of oil. So the oil drains, they hold enough oil for a couple oil changes, but these usually starts to get pretty full. So I start draining the oil. You got the bucket on top that catches the oil draining out of the engine, and then you've got the reservoir down below that holds all of it. So halfway through this thing draining, the top bucket starts to overfill. I thought, okay, maybe someone just drained it and didn't open the valve again. So I look, the valve's open, and great. And this thing, it's almost at the rim at this point. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It's top heavy because all the oil's at the top where you've got the funnel. And I realized that the funnel is bent. So what that usually meant is someone lowered a lift on the oil drain and bent it. So that's what happened to this one. So it was bent and it wasn't draining properly. So the actual funnel, I think, it'll hold probably 8 quarts or so. And it's to the top. And I'm like, great, I'll grab another one. So as soon as I go to move this, it's so top heavy, it was already bent. So it falls over and covers me in 8-10 quarts of old used diesel oil, which we call in the industry ink, because it is just like ink. You get it on you, it turns your skin black. So it takes a lot of washing to get that off. So head to toe, I'm covered in oil. I'm, of course, not very thrilled at that moment, but I laugh it off and I'm like, all right, cool. I think it was wintertime, so I had an undershirt, I had my work shirt, and a pair of pants. And I go upstairs to the lockers and I'm like, cool, I guess I'll change, I'll be fine. I pull off the first shirt, soaked in oil, like dripping off of it. Second shirt is soaked through. So I'm like, okay, fine. Take that one off. It's soaked all the way through to my skin. I've got a big old ink mark on my stomach. Shoes are full of it. I pull off my socks. You can just wring the oil out of them just about. Take all that off and then pull my pants off, and it's soaked through all the way to my shorts or my underwear. And I'm like, all right, I give up at this point. I'm going home. I go down. I don't think the other manager was there at the time. It was like an interim store where there was missing a manager. And so I call my district manager. I'm like, hey, this is what happened. Forget this. I'm going home. I need to go take a shower. He's like, what do you mean? You have to run the store. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I send him the picture where I'm head to toe covered in oil. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll be over there in 30 minutes. So he comes down and I go home, and I think I just stood in the shower for about an hour just trying to scrub all this off because, of course, oil and water don't mix, so you have to scrub, and it was not a good time. But that picture still floats around in the guys I keep in touch with from that store, and so every couple of years or so, they will send me a nice reminder of being soaked in oil. Last year, I got my business partner, Andy. We're both kind of tired of our full-time jobs. I found this kind of, call it the halfway house shop. It was working like side by side with a used car dealer as we started our business because we wanted out of our full-time jobs. So I was like, you coming or not? So we did. I had some clients built up that had followed me throughout the years and so forth. And we start working at this little 2-bay shop, and it's in like a little shopping center essentially. We got in this car from a buddy of mine. It's one of the big ProMaster vans, like a Sprinter sold by Dodge. And he bought it wrecked with a salvage title. Our job was to fix it up so he could get it rebuilt. He runs a company that he has these guys out on the road and needed this one working right. It was caved in the front, so the whole front core support was caved in, bowed in like a banana. As is very common in the post-COVID era, parts are not easy to get. So this van sat, and it sat because parts were on back order. One day in the shopping center, we didn't have a lot of parking, so one of the other tenants was like installing an air conditioning unit or something. They're like, hey, this van's backed up against the AC unit. Can you move it? And my business partner goes, yeah, sure, no problem. So he moves it. He's like, I don't want to have to move this again. So he drives it down to the next group of buildings, noses it in there because the whole front end's off of it, so it's just bare radiator, condenser, and everything showing. So he parks it there, and we think nothing of it. One day we had another car come in that had some kind of drivability complaint. And he goes to drive this car. And down in that next building, there's not a lot of cars there. No one really parks there. So it's nice and open, so he can, turn, sweep it lock to lock, and try and diagnose this drivability complaint. He goes, and I continue working. Not a few minutes later, I get a phone call. Hey, Cam, did you move the van? I'm like, what? He says, did you move the van? And I'm like, no. I was like, isn't it down there where you put it? He's like, no, I'm down here. It's not here. I'm like, oh no, oh no, oh no. Panic sets in. Young business, barely starting out. Can't find this car. I go to the key box. Key's in there. So I'm like, well, at least we have that. Everything stops. We start thinking, where could this thing have gone? Did someone take it? And we talked to the guy we were working alongside, and he's like, only thing I can think of is to go ask the property manager. Who is he? Where do we find him? He's like, oh, he's in the last building. And he's down at the end, but he's like, he's not very nice. So just take that with a grain of salt. So we're like, oh, great. So I'm like, he probably had this thing hauled off. We go down there, and we're like, hey, we're from the shop. And he's like, oh, yeah, I see you guys are working on cars and stuff. And we're like, well, there's this van. He's like, oh, I just called this company, and they towed it off. This is great. And we're like, you didn't think, we didn't want to ask him because we had the thought that he was not very nice in our mind. We could tell he was very just difficult to approach. We're just thinking like, there's a shop right here. When you see a van with the front end off of it, wouldn't you at least ask your tenants if it belongs to them? But no, he just had it hauled off. It had no tag because it was a salvage title. So even my customer didn't have ownership technically of it yet. So we call this towing company. We're like, hey, do you have this van? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, okay, great. What do I need to release it? And they're like, well, the storage fees, this, that, and the other, it adds up. It's like $600 or $700. Again, young business, this is like a detrimental blow. It's like, oh, this sucks. I'm like, okay, I need to come get it. And they're like, well, do you own it? And I'm like, no, I'm the shop that's servicing it. They're like, well, we need the owner to come get it. I'm like, oh no, how am I going to tell the customer this? So I call him and I'm like, hey, our property manager is not very nice here. He towed off your van. And he's like, oh man. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll take care of all the bill and so forth. I'm like, hey, this is what you need to do. Just go show him your paperwork. I'll take care of the rest. He's like, okay, I'll go deal with it. And he has to find all the paperwork from the auction, the bill of sale, the whole bit. He's like, okay, I think I got everything. About a day later, goes down there. He goes in, signs all the paperwork, and we go and we're like, hey, we need to come pick up the car. And they're like, which one? And I'm like, oh, come on, we already had this conversation. They're like, oh, I think that one's on the other lot or something. I'm like, great. So we have to kind of stand around there for about an hour or so after handing them $700 for them to find the van. And come to find out, it was still on one of their tow trucks out in like the second lot. And so it took a minute for them to finally bring that down. We were able to pick up the car. We drove it back. It all ended up working out, and thankfully we narrowly escaped a potential stolen vehicle early on in our business career.
Whether you see the car in person or buy it sight unseen, when you buy a pre-owned car, you need to get an inspection done by a qualified professional. And the nationwide network of trained inspectors from the Lemon Squad is the best way to accomplish that. They give you a great deal and a great bit of information about any car you're looking at very quickly. They've been supporting VINwiki now for 2 years, and I use them personally because when I'm buying a car, I need to know the full story. So check them out now at the link in the description below and use the code VINwiki for 10% off, and never buy a used car without the Lemon Squad.